kill us in a second. Right. You're good now. This should be good. Go for it. There.
Good morning. This is Dr. Obatashaka, and this is the third Dr. Obatashaka show. The topic for this morning is African-American culture centering on Pan Africanism, with an emphasis on uncovering ADOS and much of the confusion that has been created around the coming election, to clarify this so that we know what's really going on. We have two great guests for this morning. First is Sister Nadia Hyppolite, and the second is Dr. Raymond Winbush. Sister Nadia Hyppolite has been born in Haiti, been living in this country since she was 5 years of age. She's a Pan-African activist. She has worked in the social services arena for 25 years. She has started the first intensive case management system and program in New York, dealing with the mentally ill and homeless. And this is important because this is a sister who really cares about our people, because a lot of us weighing into these areas that really affect our people who really need the support. She has a master's degree in cognitive psychology from the New School and a BA in forensic psychology from the John Jay College. I know from talking to her that she knows her history, and she really knows Haitian history. And this is some of the baddest history in the history of the world. The other guest we have is Dr. Raymond Winbush. We go back a long way. Now, I want to preface this by saying something. This is one of these real smart brothers, you know, who scored high on his test. He got the break to go to a school where he could really hook up and get into this higher educational system. He holds a PhD in psychology from the University of Chicago. And what I want to say about that is a lot of our people who come from the University of Chicago or from Howard, not Howard, but from Harvard or Yale, they're lost to us, because when they get through with them, they are so whitewashed that they're no good for us. This is a brother, if he hasn't written a book on how he walked through that and kept his consciousness and became a fearless servant for African people, he should write that book, because then we might have some people who get elected president who actually do what they look like. You know what I mean?
I came through with Bobby Wright, though. Bobby Wright and I came through at the same time.
Oh.
I got you on that one.
The author of Menticide. In
That's
fact,
right.
I saw Bobby Wright about a month before he died. And I won't tell you all of what he said, but that was one bad brother. And in our culture, bad means good. So Raymond is a Pan-Africanist. He's a scholar. I met him when he was director of the Race Relations Institute. What was that?
At Fisk University.
Fisk University, which was the place where W.B. Du Bois did a lot of his work. And we went to Africa. I was able to take my mother, and it's one of two times that someone else paid my way. I've always paid my way, but in this case, he paid the way. And it was the only time my mother got to go to Africa. She lived 5 years and died 5 years later. So that was a big, important thing for her.
Right.
Raymond has appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show in 2005. He told me that Oprah said, you're the only Black expert I've had in I don't know how many years. And I think she thought that was a compliment. And Raymond said, that's a shame.
That's right.
Raymond has written a number of books. And one of them is Should America Pay? And his latest book A Concise History of Reparations for the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And he's written a number of other books. His latest one is the Osiris Papers. And this is on the great psychiatrist, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who was one beautiful sister. So you're in for a ride. This Dr. Obatashaka show is not owned by anybody except Black folks.
All right.
They call me the OR, the original revolutionary. Dr. Theophilo Benga said of me, he said, after he stayed at my house, by the way, people that don't know it, that's Sheikh Anta Diop's best student, written 17 books, speaks 10 languages. I think that he has actually outpaced Diop as a scholar. He wouldn't say so, I would. And he stayed at my house for 5 months after we hired him. He stayed on our faculty at San Francisco State for 11 years. And he's getting out of the car and he says, Tashaka, with his Congolese accent, he says, you, and we had been doing research together. He's in my study, this study right here. He was at the back desk that you see there. He used a typewriter, and at that time, he was using a pen. And he says, you, and I said, yeah, Benga, you are revolutionary. Among the major African-centered scholars, you're the only one, the only one. I hope that isn't true. I would like some company. So we're going to have a real good topic here. I want to open this and then we're going to get into a discussion that will be an interchange, bouncing back and forth between Raymond and Nadia. And I just want to put this discussion in context. This election is very important. And it's a change election. We'll talk more about why it's important right now. But right now, out of sight of a lot of people, including a lot of Black people, there's a lot of confusion that's going on. And it's designed to really shift a small percentage of Black voters into Trump's column. And just enough to shift the election. And I wouldn't even be dealing with this group ADOS if it wasn't for that, because I don't believe in giving publicity to negatives. But in this particular case, they've given themselves enough. And as will be pointed out by the two experts here, they've been given help. So I just want to put this discussion in context. Since 1968, which ushered in the second post-Reconstruction under Richard Nixon, which was a period of time, the first post-Reconstruction is when the gains of the Reconstruction of the 1865 through 1875 had gained the right to vote and participate in government and so forth, was rolled back. And since 1968, there's been a rollback on Black gains, but particularly the Black community has been hit hard. And it's been hit hard by globalization that took jobs out of the Black community and played a major role in breaking up Black families. There's a direct correlation between the loss of good paying manufacturing jobs and other good paying jobs and Black men out of the household between 1986 and, 1986, 1976 and 1982. 700,000 Black men lost their jobs and 700,000 Black men left their family. There's a correlation between the lack of viable work and the presence of Black men in the family in a two-parent household. So Black families went from 75% two-parent household for 100 years, 1865 really to 1968, to now 29% two-parent households. And American families are now at 50% two-parent households when they had been at 75% before, also because of the hit on good paying jobs. They went overseas. Big business made that decision. With that came drugs in the Black community in the 80s, and it drove a wedge between the young and the old. And what we've seen is, for the first time in our history, a real weakening of both the family, extended family community, and respect for elders, and some elders' respect for youth. And we've seen the rise of the generation gap and a disrespect for elders like we've never seen before. And so now we have what I call, and this comes from God, I don't have time to go into it now. I've gone into it before. This show will cover it more because I've been privileged to pipe into God's mind a couple of times. And because I'm not smart enough to have come up with this, these forces that have hit our community have caused a choice between two cultures. And so for the first time in our people's history, we have a situation where our people have been put in the position, particularly young people, of choosing between African-American culture and Euro-American culture. And often these choices are unconscious when they are made. And so as a result, we now see some people doing things that we have never seen before. And what I would say is that the emergence of ADOS hits this rift. And so therefore, a group like this can emerge and in part being the result of external forces, which the experts here will discuss, but in part play upon the confusion that has been caused by these external forces. We've always been historical amnesiacs, but never have we been in a position where some of us could step outside our culture. So I'm going to give only two and then get into the question. The two areas in which the hip hop generation has been most vulnerable, and the rest, they have continued African-American culture, has been one on the issue of whether the individual comes first or the group comes first. One of the things that we found for those who step outside their culture is too often they place the individual before the group. And therefore, that can be played upon by external forces. And the second thing is, my great aunt, she always had a teaching that she always taught, and she taught that people before money. That's been key in our culture. And I think that's the key in all African cultures. But now we have a big shift where a whole lot of young people, not all, but too many, place money first. So those two open us up. But the key point is, in a choice between two cultures, there's always two choices. Black Lives Matter indicates that this younger generation has made some profoundly right cultural choices, and in some cases better than we made before. They've learned lessons from us. So that's the background that I wanted to lay for this discussion. So I wanted to get into this by first getting into a question for Dr. Raymond Winbush. And I'd like you, Raymond, if you could, to explain Pan Africanism, why it is important for the global African community and for the African American community to have a deep understanding of its origins, its history, and its impact on our people.
Well, greetings, Baba Oba. I'm really glad to be here with you and Nadia to talk about this very important subject. You know, at the superficial level, as you just pointed out so eloquently, you know, we see people like Ice Cube and others, you know, talking kind of vaguely about issues of Pan-Africanism. And what I have found out in my work is that most Black folk, unfortunately, don't know what it is. And it's, first of all, it's an ideology and a political movement. It's the idea that globally, the African people, our African people, be they on the continent or in the diaspora, are one family. And the idea that we share a common culture, we share common political issues, we share a common history, and that it's something that is in, you know, culturally it's embedded in us that we are an African people. We'll get in, I'm sure, to people like Marcus Garvey and others as, you know, the program advances. I think that, you know, I consider myself a Pan-Africanist Black nationalist, and I believe that most Black folk, unfortunately, have a heavy dose of Western Eurocentric history, mathematics, just any aspect of knowledge. And that Pan-Africanism, which is always competed, for our people's attention, has not been able to do that simply because of the issue of power. You can date Pan-Africanism as early as the 1750s with Kwabena Ottobah Kuagno, who wrote a book about it, in fact, about the injustices of enslavement and so forth. I always call that the early Pan-Africanism. And then we'll talk about, Pan-Africanism with Sylvester Williams in the, early 1800s and others who taught, built it up over the past 120 odd years. So Pan-Africanism is a way of thinking that you are an African in the diaspora, and that informs your religious views, your educational views, your political views, everything. And that ultimately that formation of those in the diaspora hopefully will translate into political activity that will make a united Africa.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that even before the word Pan-Africanism came up in the dictionary, that you had Blacks in enslavement who, most of whom were not Christians, but some of whom called themselves Ethiopianists.
That's right.
This came out of a biblical passage that princes shall come out of Egypt, Ethiopia shall stretch forth his hand under God soon. And so that indicated an identification of enslaved Africans with Africa. They refused to accept the white man's version of Christianity, those that did embrace it. And I think also it's important to note that enslaved Africans, over a period of time, lost a memory of what ethnic group they came from, Yoruba, Asante, whatever, but they came to identify with the whole of Africa. And so they began to look at Africa as one. And I think the real important thing about this history is to recognize it's Africans in the US and the Caribbean who gave birth to this idea of one Africa.
That's right.
And then it translated back to the continent. So even though we face the brainwashing and we have confusion around our identification with Africa, in crisis period, we usually identify with Africa. Sister Nadia, I have a question for you. As a Pan-Africanist and Haitian, catching hell in the United States, can you give us an understanding of the Haitian Revolution and how it practically was an expression of Pan-Africanism?
Okay, I'm honored to be here with two esteemed Babas to our community. I think when we look at certain terminology, we look at the linguistic definitions versus the operational ones. I think that Pan-Africanism has been a part of who we are since the slave castles. The numerous slave rebellions on slave ships couldn't occur unless there was a sense of identity among the enslaved as a group, separate and apart for the people who were enslaving them. And in Haiti, I think the Haitian Revolution encapsulate that most strongly, because you had the coming together of various African ethnic groups who spoke different languages, who had different cultural expressions, who had to come together in order to fight for their freedom. One of our most celebrated holidays is August 14th. And that commemorates the gathering in 1791 in Bois-Caman, where we had Dutty Boukman, who was an enslaved African on the island of Jamaica. who came and joined forces with Cecile Fatiman, and along with roughly 200 other enslaved Africans to launch the Haitian Revolution. And one of the things that came out of that was a clear identity as African people. Because at that point, IET didn't exist. Haiti did not exist as a identity for those individuals. We were African. And I always, tell my kids, when I came to this country at 5, believe it or not, one of the things that was never allowed to be questioned was 1, if you're Haitian, and 2, if you're African. We never had that debate. We are African people, okay? We are Black people. We are Haitian. And all of those things are vehicles of pride. What the individuals who fought in the Haitian Revolution were able to do without higher degrees in warfare, maneuvers, and all of those other things that people would think would be necessary, we were still able to defeat at that time, the greatest global power, France. And the only reason it was able to happen was because everyone who fought on the side of Haitian people were African, and we were clear on that identity. And I think that that's one of the major ways that the system of white supremacy has always sought to control the ultimate freedom for African people.
Wow, that's heavy. I don't know if people who listen to that got the fine points that Sister Nadia made, because part of her narration we don't find in the books that we have here on the Haitian Revolution. She brought in the role of African women in launching the revolt, and she was telling me there was more than one Boukman. There were a number of them. Almost every account only speaks of one. And your point is really profound, that it was this Pan-African unity, this idea of oneness, that really drove the people to rebel, along with your religion or the spirit system, what's called voodoo, which cannot be discounted. I'm into Ifa, and I'm not an initiate or anything, but there's some real power in that. So that was a heavy account.
Well, voodoo.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying, well, it's understood that in order for the Haitian Revolution to occur, it couldn't have occurred without the spiritual gathering. That when Dutty, who was the Ougan in the ceremony, and Cecile Fatima, who's the Mambo, that the only way for us to battle this foreign force was for us to combine and connect to our ancestors, to our ancestral practices. And coming out of Africa, that is doom. And it was like, we didn't get there and have the Pentecost. We didn't get together, and call on the name of Jesus and plead on the blood. We had to use what was innate for us. And the practice of Vadun allowed that, and it worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just another point, because we're going to be getting into the ADOS narrative in just a second. One of the things that I think is really important about the Haitian Revolution is the inspiration that it provided for revolt throughout the Western Hemisphere and throughout the world, and in the United States. And I just give one example. The Denmark-Vesey Rebellion, which was the best organized of all the rebellions, was inspired directly by the Haitian Revolution. Nat Turner was too, and a host of others. So much so that Denmark-Vesey's rebellion decreed that all the whites in South Carolina had to be killed except for ships' captains so they could flee to Haiti. And they believed that Haiti would provide support for our struggle here. So anyone that wants to separate Africans from the Caribbean or Africans from the continent, by the way, his lieutenant was Gula Jack, who was an Angola voodoo priest who could turn house Negroes into field Negroes. Puppies who would kiss the masters behind to poison them. He was that good. And he had so much power over those revolutionaries that when they went to the grave, not one of them gave up anything because Gula Jack had told them, fear nothing except me. If you betray this revolution, you are going down. So this is really setting the tone for saying that you really can't separate African people wherever they are in the world. And I said this to you, and I'm going to say this publicly. I'm a warrior, and I've been in the struggle for a long time, and I love my people. I love all African people, but I have a special love for mine, as you should for yours, as all people do. And so I always say it's a poor frog that won't praise its own pond. I like the Muddy Waters pond. You know what I mean? I'm a blues man. You know what I mean? And the blues, the spirituals. You know what I mean? But I'm going to say, and so yes, this culture that Africans have here in America is a culture of popular choice, the United States and the world. Whatever we do here goes all around the world. You really can't separate this culture. You can't box us in just to the United States. So this is a bad culture, but I have to concede. And I'm always somebody that gives credit where credit is due. The baddest people on the planet ain't us. We come second. It's the Haitians. Why? They busted slavery. In the history of the world, no people have done it. We weren't the only people enslaved, and they're paying a price for it right now. And so we should respect that. And we got a whole lot of Afro-Haitians or Haitians who are being held in confinement in immigration centers, thrown out of this country. And just as we should oppose that happening to Latinos, we should oppose it happening to them. Right. And this stuff of division is bull. Anyone that has the love in their heart for our people, they love Black people and they love humanity, and they don't discriminate. And those who do, well, some of them are confused and some of them are trying to confuse. Raymond, you are, among other things, well-informed on history. Can you give us three most important things that Africans need to know about their history? And what are some of those three things?
Wow, that's a big one. You know, I think that, first of all, Africans need to read. You know, and I say in Warrior Method, in my first book, I said that I wish, and people have asked me this over and over, if you could give all Africans to do one thing every day, what would it be? I would say, read 30 minutes a day. I'm just asking for 30 minutes a day. Something about Africa.
Read comic books longer than that.
Read Black Panther. If you ain't got to read Black Panther, but spend 30, and Black folk, my students will say, well, that's a long time, you know, 30 minutes. They'll look at Empire for an hour, or Real Housewives of Jump Back Georgia for, you know,
Scandal.
2 hours or something, you know, Scandal, you know. 30 minutes a day, read something about Africans, just 30 minutes a day. I'm in the process of reading a massive book by Kwame Ture. It's a huge book, his autobiography. He wrote the last 18 months of his life, Ready for Revolution. And as you know, when Kwame answered the telephone, he always said, ready for revolution, you know, to set a mindset. But if you know, oh, there it is. There it is right on the screen. Ready for Revolution. Powerful book. I mean, I would recommend everybody read that book. But if I were to say the three things that are most important in terms of our history, first, you got to get an African foundation. So I would say go back to Kemet. but also go to Nubia and read all of that history. I mean, that's a huge history. I mean, people have to understand that for almost 8,000 years, Africans in Egypt, that was an intact civilization. And we need to get that rootedness in that. The second thing, you've got to read the period of enslavement. Um, and I'm not skipping over the so-called, I don't like to use the term medieval, but Africans from roughly the invasion of Egypt all the way up to enslavement. That's an important period. People like Mansa Musa. So read that period. And thirdly, you've got to read, a thorough understanding of African Pan Africanism, that you have to realize that all of that joy, it comes full circle. If you need to know in depth who Sylvester Williams is, who Du Bois is, Nkrumah, and what they did. So you need to read contemporary stuff. I tell my students a lot they need to read biographies, because biographies move pretty fast right now. And if you can read some biography, I want to, since Nadia held up a book, I'm going to hold up one too. I see it's on, I think I see it on, this is the one which is very good. It's a new biography of Malcolm X. Called The Dead Are Rising. And biography is good to read because biography takes you in depth into the person. And Du Bois, by David Leverly Lewis, is an excellent biography of W.B. Du Bois. So we need to read 30 minutes a day, And like John Henry Clark said about this whole division that we're going to be getting into, Africans and the ADOS movement is so guilty of this. Africans are always talking about where the slave ship landed, like, so I'm from Brooklyn, or I'm from Baltimore, or I'm from United States, or I'm from Cuba, or I'm from Jamaica, or whatever. And like ancestor John Henry Clark said, we need to not only talk about where the slave ship landed, but where it picked us all up. And we have that in common, as Baba Oba said, that the commonality of all African people is the continent, and particularly West Africa. Mm-hmm. And we need to talk more about where we came from and stop all of this division about, well, I'm Jamaican and you from California, and those West Indians do this and do that. All of that division because we don't study where we came from.
Very good. I would like to just add a couple of things to that. Often neglected when we look at ancient African history is the origin. And I agree with Raymond that it's very important to look at Kemet. It's the greatest achievement in ancient history, in world history, in terms of civilizations. Kemet is. And to ignore that would be like Europeans ignoring Greece, which got a lot of this stuff from us, though a lot more is their own. And they didn't just get it from us. And it is not necessarily their best stuff. But I would say we need to start with the beginning of human history, which is African history. That's the Twa. Europeans call them pygmies.
Yeah.
My book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures. And by the way, the figure you see on the front with the left foot forward, that's an Anu, A-N-U person. And that person is Twa. He's agrarian Twa. And over on the right side, you'll see something with 2 ears. That's Set and 4 registers on the top, great ones. This was a ruler of a nome, which would be a state in ancient Kemet, pre-dynastic, going back 10,000 BC. So we often, when we study the civilization of Kemet, we don't look at pre-dynastic, but more important, we don't look at the Twa, who came into being 144,000 years ago and laid the foundation for human history. This book, The Integration Trap, covers it, but there's other works that cover it as well. The other thing I would say is, the thing we neglect most here in studying our history is our culture.
That's right.
Afro-Haitians don't have a problem of that. They're proud of that. But some of us have drank the Kool-Aid. They stole our culture in slavery. They destroyed it. That's a part of this ADOS confusion.
Exactly.
If they stole it, explain to me, how is it that the world sees this as one of the great cultures of the world, the popular culture of the world? If they stole it, our culture is African-based, with certain things brought in that we needed for our survival, one of which is Pan Africanism, the other of which is race consciousness, which is also something that ADOS wants to throw out the window. You know what I mean? Race consciousness. We need to study our culture. And in fact, we need a new African or an African-American cultural renaissance that complements the African-centered one. So, I want to just throw that out. I study all this other stuff, but I study my people first. Everybody should. You know what I mean? So that's a little, Sister Nadia. Now we're getting into the meat of this discussion. Yeah. And we'll always have the sister come forward first. So you get to do the honors of starting this thing off. What's the connection between the presidency of Donald Trump, I prefer to call the Donald, and the right wing and ADOS, which has come into existence at the same time, 2016, as the election of Donald Trump to the presidency? Since their founding, they have launched a concentrated agenda of disinformation that is well beyond the control of these two founders who you can describe. Can you describe the key points of disinformation ADOS has launched and why you consider these points disinformation? There's a whole bunch here, but basically you're identifying ADOS and what you see in it.
Well, ADOS relies on our unawareness of historical preceding events. So a lot of us walk through life without a clear understanding about history. And so it doesn't give us the proper perspective about what we see happening around us. ADOS came into being in 2016. Okay, and they were founded by Cornell and Moore. And both of these individuals just appeared and just started putting things out on YouTube, and people started following them. And there was no real understanding about where these individuals came from. There is an organization, hold on one second, I want to make sure I get to the proper background. Okay, so Yvette Carnell is probably more of the person that laid the foundation for ADOS. And Yvette Carnell sits on the Progressives for Immigration Reform, PFIR, which is a part of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. And this group was started by an individual named John Tanton, who is a white supremacist, white nativist, and he's also a supporter of eugenics. Now, his rhetoric is always around immigration reform that keeps out Black and brown people. You never see them talking about keeping out white immigrants. As a matter of fact, they've never said a word about Donald Trump's 2 immigrant wives because they're from Eastern Europe.
That's right. Okay,
so they're fine with the white folks coming in. And one of these things, it's like when we look at it, we're like, oh, this anti-immigration framework must be new. And it really isn't. In 1915, when the KKK was being rebirthed, so to speak, they began pushing an anti-immigration agenda, particularly for non-white Europeans. They didn't want any anybody coming into this country who are not white. And here we are again, facing the same idea of keeping our Black and brown people, but this time they've assigned blackface to it.
That's right.
So now we have two Black individuals who are pushing a anti-immigration reform. And they are doing it by appealing to one of the major weapons for us is ego. So it's like Black people are being told the reason why you're not succeeding, the reason why you can't get this, and the reason why you can't get that is because of Black immigrants coming in and stealing your job.
True.
Okay. And, you know, an example of that would be out here in New York, we have HRA, it's Human Resource Authority, but they're the ones who handle public assistance and what have you. At one point, they used to hire a lot of African people, okay? They were and Black folks were up in arms. Oh, you know, them Africans, they're keeping us from getting, you know, benefits and da 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 da. Now, most of those Africans are being pushed out by Russians. The Russians are taking over those initial jobs. And you want to know what you hear? Silence.
That's right.
There are no complaints. No one is talking about, oh, we can't get these jobs for the city because they keep hiring all these Africans. Now they're hiring a whole lot of Russians and none of you are saying anything. And this is the type of scenario that ADOS is pushing. It's creating this opportunity for us to separate and disenfranchise one another from one another and never put ourselves in a place where we can challenge the system of white supremacy. So it's very hard to really get into like a prolonged conversation about ADOS because it really has no historical place. It's 2016 that y'all hit the road, and then it's like all of a sudden you supposedly have all of this influence. And when you look at the people who are pushing their influence are people who benefited from the almost the global oppression of all Black people.
That's right.
The KKK never goes to Black folks and say, oh, you born in the United States? Okay, we won't lynch you. It didn't matter where you came from. You Black, you African. Now all of a sudden they got Africans talking about, oh, I'm a descendant of slaves. And I swear in 2015, or whenever that Harriet Tubman movie came out, and Black folks were like, we tired of slave movies. Now all of a sudden, you want to base your identity on slavery.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point.
So that, in a nutshell, that's all you can really say about ADOS. They have no real historical lineage. They have no grounds. They have no longevity. They have there's really nothing there.
Yeah, and you're saying that they just came out of nowhere, and then you're showing the financial connections to them. Could you just identify a little bit more some of the key points of disinformation that they push? Some of the, you know, what you would call the ADOS line, in addition to what you've already said.
Yeah, well, and their only line is, we want to take all the resources and have it for those who are American descendants of slaves and not let any other African have a part of it. But you're not saying that about the Russians who are coming in, the Albanians who are coming in, the white immigrants that are coming in and having jobs. You're not going after their places. So it's like, if you was a true advocate against this whole immigration piece, then you would have a full agenda. Because immigration happens when you have the foreign policy of this country destroy other people's country, which forces them to migrate. So if you really want to address immigration, you need to address foreign policy, and none of them do that.
And Nadia, I think another thing that's very important is that I am surprised. I've talked to several ADOS people, and they don't even know who really, they see Yvette Carnell, Antonio Brown, whatever his name is. More. I'm thinking about the football player. They see them, but they really don't know where their money is coming from. When I start telling ADOS people, did you know that Ann Coulter, you know, the little skinny white chick, you know, with the big Adam's apple, that writes all this racist stuff about Black folk. When I say, well, she has praised the organization. And when you talk about, you mentioned FAIR, what does it stand for?
The Federation for American Immigration Reform.
Right, and they started another group, Black American Leadership Alliance, BALA, and the one also the big one, Progressives for Immigration Reform. You know, Neely Fuller says the #1 tool of white supremacy is deceit. And see, when you have a group called FAIR, and we have something called Black American Leadership Alliance, and Progressives,
right,
for immigration reform, it sounds like, oh wow, these people are really progressive, they're Black, they're all of this stuff like, but in reality it's deceit. And so all of these organizations are funded by the extreme left, right, and as you say, founded by white supremacists. But we get, you know, bought into this because we don't know our history. We don't study issues of divisions among us and how white people have consistently tried to undermine us. When, you know, I was doing some background on the Pan African Congress that we talked about earlier, and I was surprised, but not maybe surprised is the wrong word, but the reason why a lot of Africans didn't come to several of the early Pan African Congresses was because the governments of those nations wouldn't give them visas, told them that it was a bunch of radicals and they didn't want, if they came, they wouldn't be able to get back into their home countries and all of this stuff like that. White people are doing the exact same thing with ADOS. They put Black folk in front of it, like you said, in blackface. After they put them in front of it, everybody thinks, oh, this is a Black organization. And it really isn't. And then you see the deception that has been, you know, imbibed by people like Ice Cube and these others who really don't know, frankly, what they're talking about.
Hold up on Ice Cube, because
I'm gonna hold up on Ice Cube for a minute.
Now, just to add a point here, y'all are experts. I've just started reading on ADOS. My wife has been telling me about him for a year. She's been really angry, and I understood where she's coming from. One of the distinctions they make is between race as a false category, and therefore race consciousness is false identity. Now, they are dealing with the truth that race is a false category,
right,
but racism is a reality.
Thank you.
That ain't false. And the fact is, because, and this is where I want to make it a separation between the leadership and a lot of the confused membership. I suspect this leadership knows better because they seem to be quite smart and they seem to be quite good at propaganda. And I think they're fairly well read. I think they have deliberately bought a line for their own reasons. You'll get into that in a minute. You already have to a point. So when they say that race is a false category, yeah, whites created the idea of races.
Right.
But the fact is, racism is what we face every day. Now, what they've done is throw out the baby with the bathwater, because then they're saying we need to give up on racial identity. And that indicates an ignorance of our history, which I don't think the people who assert this have. I think they're deliberately playing it. But the majority of our people are being played. And here's how it's played. Anyone who studies African-American history knows this. The glue that ties it together is race consciousness. Why? Because over the years, we lost a memory of what part of Africa we came from, and we identified Blackness, Negroness, coloredness. You could put whatever term you want on it, race consciousness as the thing that binds us together. It's not the sole feature or principle of African-American culture. There are many others: spirit, family, democracy, improvisation. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in there. But the key thing is that's the glue. So if you say that glue is false, then what you're doing is stripping Black people of their essence. Why is it that most Black people are not going to listen to ADOS, race consciousness? They're smart enough to know that the people you're going to lead them to are going to lynch them. The average Black person is smart. We don't elect dumb people to office. We didn't vote for Trump. It's only a small percentage that did. So throwing out the baby with the bathwater, throwing out race consciousness, with no race consciousness, no Garvey movement.
That's right.
Garvey, in fact, came here unconscious. He supported the King of England. He supported the war, World War I. He sent a letter to the King of England, George, telling him how much he loved him. But after Blacks came back from World War I, they were so angry at being used as cannon fodder in a war between two white powers who were fighting to see which could get control of Africa and Asia and the Caribbean. He woke up. Black people woke him up, and then he woke us up. I'm not knocking Garvey. Garvey's my first master. Malcolm's my second. I wear a goatee because of Malcolm. I learned economics, how to build businesses. I'm pretty good at that, by the way. I'm one of the few nationalists good at business. You all know that? I don't believe in broke. Broke's a joke, but I ain't no capitalist either. I think capitalism is a terrible system. Bury it. But as John Henry Clark said, and he was a socialist, you need a little capital. Being broke just ain't a good thing. So the thing, and by the way, they're getting their money through the enemy. So the key point is that's false narrative. And so what are you left with? The rag that they call the flag, the red, white, and blue. That's all you got. You hear me? What a joke. For what? A check. And guess what? A check is only going to take care of you for a minute. After you buy your Rolls Royce, and you're a white woman, you could be broke. So I'm sorry to go off.
Baba.
Yeah, go
no
ahead.
problem. I wanted to add in that Yvette Carnell has one of her earlier videos where she's talking about why it's beneficial to identify as ADOS and to pull away from the larger African identity, is that they are looking and striving for white privilege.
Yeah.
That if they somehow convince themselves and ultimately convince whites that they are somehow different, because it's like that's their push, is that there is a fundamental difference between the American descendants of slavery and all the other Black folks out there.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
eventually they want to access white privilege.
Right.
And I make a comment there. Many observers on this show have gone through, go up there and tell her to turn it on. Many of people have gone through, who are watching this, a series that I call the 6-fold stages to mental freedom. And these are stages of awakening. And you will note that the first stage is called assimilation. That is where you take on the identity of your oppressor. Now, whether the founder of this movement has actually taken on the identity or just identifies with the greenbacks, I don't know. But the key point is, for those who sincerely believe this, this is a profound indication of self-hatred, because what it indicates is you have stepped out of your own identity. And if you are not clear
Mhm.
about who you are, you don't know where you are, where you've been, or where you've gone. And anybody can use you. So I'm just pointing out for the people who are being used by this, don't fall for it, but you have to wake up. You have to do what Dr. Winbush said, read so you know who you are. Now I wanted to get into, so this is good. Dr. Winbush, can you describe what or who supports ADOS? Some of it has already been covered, but there may be more. How has it been captivated by a small but influential sector of Black people, including Ice Cube? And these entertainers have used this for supporting or justifying their support of Trump, saying that the Democrats have failed us, and therefore what we must do is rely on the Donald's administration. Some celebrity apologists have even gone so far as to say that Trump is a greater president than Obama, who he despises, who Trump despises. What do you think is behind this kind of support for Trump?
Well, again, if you, as Nadia pointed out, you got these two groups, the PFIR as well as FAIR, these anti-immigration white supremacist group backing them. Keep in mind that one of the things that ADOS said a lot of, they use the hashtag tangibles, saying that if we don't get reparations, so then they start attacking the reparations struggle. That's where I've had some problems with them, but we'll get into that as well. But if they say tangibles, they're saying if the Democrats don't support reparations, don't vote for them. So it's a very clever voter suppression tactic to get Black folk not to vote. And I've seen on social media a lot of Black people, they're not even affiliated with ADOS. I ain't gonna vote because they both crazy. You know, I ain't voting for either one of them. That's what ADOS wants. And specifically the white supremacists that are backing ADOS, that's what they want. So they know that if they can suppress the Black vote, step one, then get Donald Trump reelected, step two, they can accomplish step three, which is the anti-immigration laws that he has already implemented and going to go further with. So, I mean, it's an insidious movement because there's so many levels to it. But the primary backers, as Nadia says, have been PFIR and FAIR. There's one video of Yvette on YouTube, poor thing. She's actually wrapped herself in the American flag. You know, what I call as you call, Baba, the American rag. Not the red, black, and green of Garvey or anything like that, but the red, white, and blue of our oppressors. And she, you know, as Nadia pointed out, I hate to say it, but it's almost like we want white privilege. We don't want to be connected to Africa at all, at any level. I argued with one because, you know, there's an organization in the Caribbean called CARICOM, and they're pushing for reparations too. And they have said to me, well, Winbush, if CARICOM is pushing for reparations in the Caribbean, you should be supporting ADOS here in the United States. The fact of the matter is that CARICOM and NARC and COBRA, we're all working together. But they don't choose to say that. I mean, Sir Hilary Beckles, who's kind of the titular head of CARICOM, he and I gave a workshop in Scotland, of all places. And Africans from Europe were talking together about the issue of reparations. So ADOS is a big white lie that has penetrated, I think, as I said earlier, because we don't read. If we would read more about our history and read how white supremacy, those 9 areas that Dr. Welsing talked about, religion, race, entertainment, it's penetrated that, and we tend to believe like the shadow of our African selves rather than looking at the history of our people.
That's a real good point you're making there. And so that you've got some people in the Caribbean that have actually been confused and think that ADOS is a legitimate representative on reparations. And that's, again, their smart media strategy. One thing I think that needs to happen is that, for example, groups like Black Lives Matter, who I think have done some really good work around not only police issues, but generally mobilizing in support of Black issues at large, they need to link this up with their issues as well, because every front needs to make it clear what reparations is really about. So this isn't a question that we had laid out before, but just Raymond, on your background, what are some of the key things that you think that the real reparations movement is calling for as opposed to ADOS? Some of the key points.
Well, see, I think that they're using reparations as a vehicle. You know, it's like, I mean, you could say, well, they influenced Ice Cube. They had some, you know, Gavin Newsom out your way in California signed that legislation to set up a commission, and they're owning some of that stuff. But in reality, they're really pushing the agenda of voter suppression and anti-immigration legislation. Reparations is kind of like a vehicle, you know. So, and if you notice, as Nadia so brilliantly pointed out, ADOS only started in 2016, and this so-called hashtag of tangibles came after that. And it was a way of like saying, okay, we know that Black people want reparations. Let's make that a divisive issue among Black folk, you know, and at the same time, we know white people don't want to even talk about reparations as much as Black folk. So let's make that. So it's kind of a vehicle to further divide Black people and to alienate white people and stuff. I mean, it's a matter, you know, of being very confused about several things that are legitimate struggles within the reparation movement. So if you say, what is the overlap? They're calling for reparations, but, and it's most of the reparations that they're talking about is cash payment. One of the people, maybe I shouldn't mention his name, but I think I should, is Sandy Darity. He's a professor of economics and somebody that I've known for quite some time at Duke University. And I wrote Sandy about a year ago. I'll make the letter public. And I asked him, why was he connected to ADOS? And so if you read Sandy's new book, which I have, he says that Black folk are owed $6.25 quadrillion, not trillion, quadrillion. There ain't that much money in the whole United States. And so it makes the movement look ridiculous to say, first of all, you ain't gonna give Black folk no $6.25 quadrillion. And but by saying that, it trivializes the reparation struggle. And unfortunately, Sandy had been connected with them.
So just summarize basically a few of the key demands of the reparations movement, as opposed to the simplistic cut us a check.
Well, I mean, simply, I mean, African people in this country, we believe that the government owes us. We also believe corporations owe us. So the reparation struggle, and also individuals owe us. I forgot to say that the reparation struggle has always been about exacting payment for the crimes against humanity from the transatlantic slave trade, always. We are going after corporations. You probably are familiar with Deidre Farmer Paleman's lawsuit in 2005 in the 5th District in Chicago, in which she sued 22 corporations for reparations. Aetna Life Insurance, for example, you know, that used to have insurance policies by slave masters on their enslaved people. So in other words, if one of their enslaved Africans broke a leg, the so-called master would get a payment. Just like if I wreck my car and I've got insurance, I get paid for the damage done to the car. So she sued their governments right now. We've made major victories in Evanston, Illinois right now. That city is now paying reparations to its people. It's happening also in Asheville, North Carolina. And again, it's getting ready to happen in Washington, D.C. I'm not free to talk about all of that now, but it's going to happen in Washington, D.C. So it's simply, when we met in the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001, we said that we declared the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity and always was, which was key language. And we demand that governments, individuals, and corporations pay for those crimes coming from the transatlantic slave trade, which these corporations, governments, and individuals benefited from. That's a long summary. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it clarifies it more than cutting the check.
Yeah, way beyond cutting a check.
And give us white privileges.
Right.
Have you noticed what Hitler did to the white privileges in Germany? You know what I mean? You got
more about Germany than I do. But
Yeah.
You got
he had his hierarchy of humanity.
Yeah, Sister Nadia.
For them.
This is a little question.
Yes, sir.
What's the political affiliation of the founders of ADOS? What party do they belong to? A party?
As far as whether they're Democrats or
Republican? Yeah.
That I honestly, I don't know, but I do know that they have come out against the Democrats, mainly presenting the, and that's the thing about, this misinformation is like they use a certain grain of truth, but the way that they embellish it almost makes it not sensical. So yes, we've had a lot of problems with the Democratic Party, but then we've also had a lot of problems with the Republican Party. And during this whole last 4 years and this whole push on, we want reparations, we want reparations. Prior to 2016, there was hardly any talk in the general Black population about reparations. Now, all of a sudden, people were basing their political choices on who, quote unquote, supported reparations. And this would somehow influence who they chose. And while they were pushing that for the Democrats, no one ever asked Trump if he supported reparations. No one was going around asking Republicans if they supported reparations, because the agenda wasn't about reparations. What it was about was to cause a certain disinterest within the Black population in the voting process, in the governmental process. And so a lot of people accepted that. They used that as a justification for them to really not do the hard work. And it's like, yeah, Biden isn't the greatest, we ain't gonna, he isn't. But when you compare him to Trump, there is no comparison. There really is no choice. And people are not willing to have that discussion. So they'll use the Democrats, we ain't gonna get reparations from them. Or they didn't come up with the contract with Black America, or whatever it is that Ice Cube is pushing. And it was like, where did you come from all of a sudden as a person who can establish a contract, to understand what the needs are for Black America, to even go and have a discussion with somebody who half the time isn't connected to reality anyway. Trump as half the time is not even, you don't even know what dimension he's operating in. And you actually think you're going to have a legitimate contract with this person, that we should risk another 4 years of a president who pushes the militarization of the police, who supports the police killing innocent Black people simply because they are the police. And it's like you're willing to discount all of that because, there really isn't it, because you're not really having a discussion about reparations.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I understand that Yvette Carnell has been seen publicly wearing a
MAGA.
Vote for Trump, Make America Great Again hat.
That's right.
And that,
I missed those.
huh?
No, it's on YouTube.
I said I missed those.
Yeah. And I
Oh
understand
Lord.
that the way in which they're encouraging Black people to handle the vote is either vote for Trump or don't vote.
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
clearly, they are supporting the Republican agenda and the Republican Party. And I'll just say this: if Trump is in office 4 more years, there are going to be a lot more dead Black people. We are doing most of this dying, and over 220,000 COVID-19 deaths, Black and brown. And there's going to be many more, because if this sucker would not do anything to stop this virus when he could have, and I pointed out on my show on Black Reconstruction that there are countries around the world that have had no deaths or hardly any. Taiwan, 5 deaths. Cuba, 120. Vietnam, 7 or 8. And they share a border with Wuhan. The recent study done by a major medical association in this country showed there shouldn't be any more than 1,500 to 2,000 deaths in this whole country. This sucker has committed what I call a viral side. That means genocide by virus, not because the virus caused it, but because of the way in which it's been handled, which has not been handled at all. Not to mention his support of the white supremacist movement in this country, calling them heroes, calling out the Proud Boys, calling out the Boogaloo Boys. You know what I mean? Stand up and be ready. And they've said what that means for them is they'll do whatever they're told. And that includes, some of them have been found, at least armed people at voting polls. You know what I mean? So to suggest that Trump is somebody you can work with is ridiculous. And in fact, it is not a question of whether we like any candidate. Lincoln, who emancipated Blacks, thought Blacks were inferior, wanted to ship us out of the country. You know what I mean? Did Blacks turn down emancipation because of that? And do you think that you can pressure Trump when in fact you've got a wind at your back, a movement going on? Black Lives Matter and others, you can pressure Biden. You can pressure him. Lyndon Johnson, I was a leader in the Black Freedom Movement in the 60s. Johnson was a racist, but he caved in on voter rights. He caved in on civil rights. He caved in on the war on poverty. He caved in on model cities programs. He caved in. So this politics ain't no love affair. Politics about power. And me, electoral politics is secondary. The streets is primary. You got action in the streets. So all this confusion going around, I think it's designed to do whatever you can to neutralize Black votes. What I wanted to do was just wrap up on a few things, Sister Nadia and then Brother Winbush. One is
before Baba, before we move on, I just want to make a point about this election. 4 more years of Trump is referendum on the alt-right on white supremacy. And that is dangerous. We, again, and it ties into how much of history we don't know. It's like most Black people are walking around and they think about white supremacists or people who just call you the N-word, or it's just a matter of like white people being not nice to you. That is not what these alt-right KKK offspring are about. That KKK that was established in December 24th, 1865, like they're the newborn baby Jesus, was slaughtering Black people.
Right.
the atrocities of like the crimes that were committed to Black bodies, where they were barbecued and pieces were pulled off and eaten. That's the history of the alt-right. That's the history that Donald Trump doesn't find a problem with. And we need to understand, it's like, that's dangerous. It's like, yeah, Biden is not the greatest. However, we do have the wind at our back. We have social media. We have public access where we can hold his feet to the fire. We can hold him accountable. You're not going to have that with Trump.
Right. That's right. You know, it's let me just say this real quick, Baba, and Nadia. You know, over here in Maryland, where I am, about 4 days ago, this white boy who is supporting Trump, of course, went around to everyone in Frederick, Maryland, who had a Biden-Harris sign in their yard, put a letter under their door or attached it to their mailbox saying, "We are going to assassinate Harris and Biden. And since you have a sign in your yard, we're coming after you as well." So these are very serious. I think, and I've told people, I think this is probably one of the most dangerous times in American history, other than the outbreak of the American Civil War. There were dangerous times during the Civil Rights Movement. There's been dangerous times, but this is a very dangerous time because we have a guy in office right now who has opened the box, if you please, of saying it is fine to be racist. All of these presidents have had some form of racism. What is Kenneth O'Reilly's book? What's the name of that book? Nixon's Piano says that
Nixon's Piano.
Yeah, every president up until Dwight D. Eisenhower made a publicly racist statement. And that includes Roosevelt, all of these people that we say, well, they were great towards Black people. And Johnson, all he did was use the N-word behind closed doors and in some cases in front of folk. So I think what we have to realize that we're in a very dangerous time, and white people are preparing for an American Civil War. ADOS is just one of the vehicles that it is using for some of that stuff. And unfortunately, many of our so-called celebrities and people like that who have just not been, they're just not up to snuff intellectually.
Yeah, and I think we're going to wrap up on this one, and then we're going to open up for the audience. I agree with both of you. That this is white supremacy raw, and this is a repeat of something that's gone on before. And I think what we're seeing is something very close to the Hayes-Tilden compromise, because in a close election between Hayes and Tilden, it went to the House. And in exchange for Hayes, who had received a smaller amount of popular votes, he was elected president on two conditions. One, he would draw federal troops from the South so that the Klan could ride over Blacks. Blacks had militias at that time. The show that I did before this on post-Reconstruction goes through that. They were armed, and these were Civil War veterans, and they were defending their families and Reconstruction legislatures. But once federal troops withdrew, then they started bulldozing at a maximum level. Black people call bulldozing burning you out, lynching you. And as Sister Nadia pointed out, cutting your body into pieces. So that was the first post-Reconstruction. The other thing that's often missed about that first post-Reconstruction is one of the conditions of the Southerners for Hayes being elected president was putting two Supreme Court justices, Southern Supreme Court justices, on the Supreme Court. And they wiped out civil rights law. They wiped out what was left. And what you've seen with Trump, where he's put on a rabid conservative, so that now there'll be a 6-9 majority on the Supreme Court. And this person has not testified to a single thing that she believes in, but she belongs to the praise worshipers, which is a right-wing sect within the Catholic Church. That's right. She will end Obamacare so that pre-existing conditions will be gone, so that people who are now suffering from something from COVID-19, that's a pre-existing condition. You will get a $200,000 medical bill, or you will not live. And so that's a part of it. And she will go after what's left of the voting rights law. And she will go after everything else. So if you sweep this election and sweep the Senate out, your first agenda is put pressure on Biden to expand the Supreme Court. Quit calling it packing. There's no rule in the Constitution that says limit. And you need to put at least 4 on there, and they need to be hard liners, not these soft liners that the Democrats always put on there. Right. So, I mean, that is one thing that needs to happen. We need to see that if you don't put Trump out of the White House and prepare him for the jailhouse, then what you're going to see is something you have never seen before. And here's the key point, and I want to end this on immigration. The right wing is in retreat. Whites in power are in retreat. Why? We are witnessing the decline of America and the fall of America. Europe has already fallen. And what are they falling and declining to? By the time that a majority of people in this country will be black, brown, red, and yellow, which means numerical stranglehold on power in this country, which has been based on whites, will be broken. It does not mean their power will be broken, but that is the first step to breaking the power. They're on retreat because they know that. They also know there's nothing they can do about it. Trump is in office talking about build the border and all the rest of that. The Latino is, first of all, outbirthing you. Number 2, they're outnumbering you along with us and Asian people. And you can't stop that. And in fact, you took half of Mexico. They are coming into places that you took from them. You understand? Like where I live, California. So the thing is, they are on the defensive because immigration cannot be stopped in terms of changing the face of this country. And what I want to say to the listeners of this program, quit training your children to serve this system. Train your children to get ready to change the system, and one in which black, brown, red, and yellow and conscious whites will rule.
That's right. Not
the unconscious. As Malcolm said, we need to get into, Black Lives Matter's got this right, restructuring. And in this case, Malcolm said, America is as crooked as a pretzel. He said, if a pretzel could be straight, America wouldn't be crooked. So what we need to do is take something crooked and make it straight. That was King's conclusion at the end of his life. So that is really the challenge. So we need to understand that white power is in retreat. This anti-immigrant stuff cannot possibly work. And what we need to do is understand that it's really a question of what is our agenda going to be? And that agenda has got to be something that comes from the grassroots. A lot of black males have been priced out of the family. Our next show is going to be on young black males. I have a brother named Dr. Siri McDougal. He's my replacement at San Francisco State, written a book on black males. He is a conscious black male. He just had him a cyber wedding in which his wife is a Zulu woman, Zulu Zosa.
All right.
So take that and shove that down your throat, you anti-immigrant suckers. And a beautiful sister who, when she gave her vows, she said this, and I was crying. It takes a lot to get me to cry. So was my wife. She said, she pulled out her paper to read this because she wanted to make sure she got it just right. I think her name is Zuma. She said, I'm marrying this man because he's kind, he's loving, he's caring, he's an exceptional black man, an exceptional man, not exceptional for black people. And I started crying because it's the truth. This is a beautiful black man. You understand? We got a lot of beautiful black men and black women. And what we need to do is shape an agenda so that they have a future. So that's part of what we're going to be dealing with here. So what I really want to say to the listeners out there, we're going to open this up now. You've been treated to some beautiful wisdom by Dr. Raymond Winbush and Sister Nadia Hyppolite, 2 conscious Pan Africanists who just care about the truth and who told you the truth. There's no rewards for them telling you this. And what you need to do is be sharing this. This isn't just about the election. It's about your empowerment. So I hope you got something out of this. I know I did. Sister Nadia, I learned a lot. And I'm going to be calling you for more information on Haitian history. And Brother Winbush, I've been knowing you a long time. I really love you, brother. And I also love the work that you did with Brother Conrad Worrell, who was national chair of the National Black United Front. I was national vice chair.
Yeah.
I was a founder. He wasn't. In fact, when we were founding NBUF, he was running around saying, "What is this NBUF? What is this?" Because Conrad was from Chicago. So Conrad suspected everything. But then he found out what it was and got deep into it. And the two of you did a lot of work on reparations. And beautiful brother. And by the way, he made a very important point about ADOS. He said it's a hashtag. He said,
He refused to call it an movement.
Don't treat it like a movement, even though it's been on the ground for its convention. Don't. It's a hashtag. And he said, movement is an honorable name. You've got to struggle for that. I know, because I've been in movements.
That's right.
He was, you are, both of you are, and many of our people are. So something that comes out of thin air, don't confuse it with what's on the ground. And by the way, Raymond sent me a thing that ADOS has done on Doc Ben.
Yeah, yeah.
Word, F. Doc Ben. For those of you who don't know what that is, Dr. Joseph Ben Jacqueline, one of the greatest scholars in the world.
That's right.
He spent his life, John Henry Clark, I apprenticed under him. They were both buddies. John Henry Clark, for those of you that don't know, is another one of our greatest scholars. And John said, well, you know, for Doc Ben, Egypt's a fetish. He wasn't criticizing. He just meant that Egypt was his passion. And so he wrote all kinds of stuff on ancient Egypt. Though I think his best book was on Africa's gift of religion to the world.
Right.
That's his best book.
Yes.
But the point is, here's a guy who dedicated his life to telling you the truth, and you're going to say, F him? Well, I don't believe that 0.9% of Black people buy that. And anyone that does that is a traitor to Black people.
That's right.
Because these are people,
Yes.
Doc Ben died broke. He died poor, but he died rich. Why? To teach you the truth. And by the way, Malcolm X wouldn't have been as conscious as he was, but for Doc Ben. Doc Ben was an advisor to him. When I wrote my book on political legacy of Malcolm X, Doc Ben was one of the people that I cited. And he told me stuff about Malcolm. But the point is, Malcolm had him a brain thrust. He was the smartest man we produced politically in the 20th century, not Black man. He was the smartest one, period. Black, white, brown, red, yellow. Why? He drew on the brains of people like Doc Ben, Joseph Ben Jacqueline. So let me tell you something. This show's about love. It's about giving you some information. And so we're not putting everybody in ADOS down. We know some people are just misled. Wake up. But for those of you who are pushing the right-wing agenda, you are not on our side. You're not our people. You don't represent us. And as far as we're concerned, we're going to expose you wherever you go. So we're open now to people out in the viewing audience to raise questions. I know this is the part you like, but notice this. We're not doing what a lot of these, because I say there's two things in reality on this internet. There's the ignornet and there's the Afronet. And then there's the infonet. The infonet doesn't have to be African-centered, but they're giving you good information. Amy Goodman, Democracy Now!, you understand? Jewish American. She's putting out good information. That's an infonet. But then there's the ignornet, and we're against that. You know what I mean? So I want to thank both of you. You all want to say anything in closing, and then we'll open this up to the audience. Got anything you want to say?
You said it all, Baba.
Sister Nadia, got anything you want to say?
Same here. No, you said it all.
Okay. Okay, now we're open for any questions. I think it'll take a few seconds for questions to get through or comments, but we would prefer questions. Give us some questions, folks. is a
repeat the statement.
this is a message coming from the United Kingdom, from Birmingham. It's a brother named Beanie Brown, and I've been working with him for almost 50 years in the United Kingdom. By the way, Africans in America actually work with Africans around the world.
That's right.
He's saying that he likes the show,
Yeah.
and he wants us to keep on keeping on. And I just want to say Beanie Brown is a brother who comes from the Caribbean Self-Help Organization, and he is a part of a group in the United Kingdom called the Pan African Congress Movement. And they were representative of the United Kingdom at the 6th Pan African Congress. I chaired the political committee of the 6th Pan African Congress for North America. And they represented the United Kingdom, and they had the strongest delegation of Africans outside of Africa. And they basically argued that while race and class are important, race is the primary issue facing African people throughout the world. And so they've been organizing now nearly 50 years. And they hold African Liberation Day every year. My organization, Pan African People's Organization, held it for about 5 years. In the 70s, we averaged 30,000 people a year. That was the largest African Liberation Day outside of the first one in Washington, D.C. And by the way, one of our honored guests was C.O.R.E. James.
Wow.
And I have a newspaper that we put out called The African Awakener. It's a picture of him speaking. He stayed at my house for a week. C.O.R.E. James is the author of Black Jacobins. He is one of the founders of the modern Pan-Africanist movement. He was a person who helped develop Kwame Nkrumah, who became president of Ghana. And in fact, John Henry Clark tells a story where C.O.R.E. James sent Nkrumah to Britain to meet a guy named George Padmore.
Oh, yeah.
Real name Malcolm Nurse.
Yeah.
He organized the 5th Pan-African Congress.
University.
And what happened is, this is a little story. This is not in any history book. C.O.R.E. James had actually sent him with a sealed letter to give to Padmore. And I think Nkrumah was smart enough to open it and didn't give it to Padmore. And so they then had the 5th Pan-African Congress. For people that don't know, because the issue of what's the value of Pan-Africanism, this was the most important gathering of any people of color in the 20th century because it plotted the independence of Africa and carried it out. And Nkrumah was the first one to do it. But what was funny is in this envelope, Nkrumah later, I'm sure he opened it before he got to Britain. Later, he had a meeting of Africanists, Pan-Africanists in Ghana. I think it was the Accra conference. And he had a special dinner. John Henry Clark was there, a number of others. And he opened this letter. And this is what C.O.R.E. James had sent to Padmore. It says, this is to introduce Kwame, and he had a Middle Christian name, Nkrumah. He said, he's kind of confused, but if you take some time and work with him, he might gain some clarity. And then Nkrumah, as a practical joke, read it and he says, am I confused now? And then he started laughing because John Henry Clark said he had teeth that were so white and so perfect, they looked unreal, and he was a practical jokester. And so this was his big joke. So by way of Beanie Brown in the UK, they're holding up the banner of Pan-Africanism in the UK, and they've been supporting our struggle here. Any other questions come through?
Just acknowledgement from Carnita Groves, Madagascar and Ghana. And then
hold it. There's a sister named Carnita Groves from Madagascar and Ghana. And she just wanted to say that she was observing the show.
And maybe subject for another show, where are the Black Panthers these days?
A person said, maybe a subject for another show, where are the Black Panthers these days? Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, they're around in a variety of ways. You know, Kathleen Cleaver is still alive, as most of us know, and teaches at Emory University in Atlanta. There's been a lot of things going on with the Black Panthers over the past 30 years since, you know, J. Edgar Hoover and his COINTELPRO group. I was fortunate enough, and there's a film coming out in about, should be out in December, called Jesus and the Black Messiah, about Fred Hampton. And I was able to help out on that film that'll give a lot of updates about the Panthers and stuff like that. That's a history that we need to study. And just as an aside, we also need to study the offshoots of the Black Panther Party, which was the Black Liberation Army. Sometimes the BPP is held up as like the only revolutionary group during that time, but the BLA was an offshoot of them and did a lot of work. Assata Shakur was part of that group. So I just wanted to add that, but a good show would be, you should do a show about that, Baba.
Yeah, and Asante Shakur would not be free but for the Black Liberation Army and the Weather Underground, which was an offshoot of SDS. These were white radicals, which I respect. Any white who's like John Brown, hey, I want to see you. I want to show you a picture here, right here. You see this? This is Donald Cox.
Oh my, no, I've just read his book.
Yeah, you don't want to name the name of the book, but I'm an N-word. Now, the thing is,
say the name of the book, yeah.
Here's something you don't know. Donald Cox was my public relations chair in the Congress of Racial Equality.
You got to be kidding.
Congress of Racial Equality is the San Francisco Freedom Movement, is the mother of all the movements in California, and it precedes the Black Panther Party, gives rise to a good part of the Black arts movement.
Right.
But going back to DC here, DC was a very quiet, humble brother. And many who later took part in the San Francisco state strike, including Benny Stewart, who was chair of the Black Students Union. That's the mothership for Black studies at 4 universities. That's where I taught for 40 years. I walked the strike, but the students led it. He said of Donald Cox, they called him DC. DC became Field Marshal Black Panther Party, was framed for the murder of an FBI agent, which he didn't do, and was in exile and died in exile in France a couple of years ago. Benny Stewart said of Donald Cox, he was the best Panther.
Look, the last conversation that I had with Kathleen Cleaver was about Cox, DC, as she called. She said he epitomized the Black Panther Party.
Right. The best of the Black Panther Party.
Exactly.
Because he had no ego.
That's right.
Used women.
That's right.
Courageous and bold. He was so courageous and bold, he would call me on the phone to sell me guns. I'd say, hang the damn phone up. And then we talk and I'd buy the guns. They were legal. But on the phone, come on, FBI, CIA, you know what I mean? But the point is, the San Francisco Freedom Movement was like the mothership. If you go and look at my first show, I give you a little indication of that. And there's another thing called Obatashaka San Francisco Public Library. There's a summary of that movement. We're the only movement that defeated an entire power structure. Only movement that organized 45,000 Black people block by block. Only movement that built housing for poor people. You hear me?
I'm aware of that.
Fighting an entire economic power structure for jobs for Black people, and that is still a big fat issue, and built an effective Black United Front because we buried our egos. That's FBI right. Couldn't get in. They tried, but they couldn't get in because our people came first. We had a bunch of brilliant people. I was the chief strategist, chief spokesman. I was a full-time organizer, but I had a whole bunch of people around me who were real smart. You hear me? And we didn't have no problem listening to whoever had good advice. By the way, we had police coming into our group telling us, Black police, you're infiltrated. They didn't tell us who, we go find them because they got their jobs through us. We never fought for cops to get jobs, but it was a spillover. They saw it, they were there for us. So DC, bad brother. Of course, he liked the ladies. He was. Bad as he was, the ladies would like him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? That's it. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Well, this has been good, man. I've learned a lot. So, I'm glad anything we can do to help you know, and Nadia, you know, she knows everything about Haiti. I think sometimes she knew Dessalines or something in another life. So
Yeah, he's the best of the leaders.
Oh,
right.
The
People,
baddest.
people talk about Louverture, but it was really Dessalines was the man.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Nadia, your spirit
Yeah.
and your brilliance is great. And I hope we do a lot more work together. You got the spirit of Haiti, lady.
yeah. Well, it's like I told Raymond that, you know, the world knows Toussaint, and that, you know, for Haitian people, Toussaint was our favorite uncle. Dessalines was our father.
It's all right.
So it's like there's a saying, like when you're have the warrior spirit, they call you Petit Dessalines. And it's like that's always been my title. Petit Dessalines.
Right on.
That's my dad. So
And
I did know them.
by the way, for people that don't know, when Dessalines came to power, he enacted, and of course there's probably more, but according to Dr. Jacob Carruthers in his book on the Haitian Revolution, he enacted 3 policies that he stressed. One was no one in Haiti could call themselves of African ancestry, could call themselves anything but Black or African. One, only Africans or Black people could own the land in Haiti. And this was, I think, the most beautiful of all his policies, and one that he was free to violate, and he did not. He said the land of Haiti would be owned equitably, not some having more than others. And that's an improvement on communalism. Great leaders actually improve on their culture, but it showed his dedication.
Yeah.
Had he lived, the Haitian people would not be ground into the dust today.
No, we wouldn't. But that's why they ended him. But that's for another show.
Right.
You know.
But it's our obligation to support Haiti.
Absolutely.
Our obligation to do everything we can to see that the stranglehold that the U.S. and the West has put on Haiti for punishing them for being free, not wanting to be free.
Right.
Being free. You know, that's a noose that we need
and we had to pay.
Yes.
That's right.
That's our job. We should,
And we had to pay reparations.
yeah, to France.
To France of all people.
Yeah.
For your freedom. Ain't that a joke?
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all. This has been beautiful.
Yes.
Make me feel good like a
Yes.
man should.
Yes.
Good. I'll see y'all now. Take care.
Thank you.